Putting your company data into SharePoint doesn't suit every business. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the limitations of using SharePoint, plus we're going to look at the number one alternative. It's called Azure Files. Plus, I'm going to give you a full demo. But before we start, just a quick introduction. My name is Jonathan Edwards from Integral IT. We help businesses all over the world with the Microsoft 365. Now, if you're a regular watcher of this channel, you'll know that we are big fans of businesses utilizing all that Microsoft 365 has to offer. Now, a big component of this, especially for document storage, is using OneDrive and SharePoint. As the name suggests, One, as in OneDrive, is for your own data. Things like payslips, things that you might not want other people to see. But then we've got SharePoint, and this is, as the name suggests, for sharing. So you might put a lot of your shared company data into a SharePoint site. Now, a well-designed and effective setup of OneDrive and SharePoint will work well for about 90% of companies. Now, please note, I did say a well-designed and effective setup. I do see lots of businesses where it wasn't set up properly, and that's a story for another day. But there are other businesses too that just won't get along well with SharePoint. Businesses who have large files, maybe architects with CAD drawings, or businesses with lots and lots of data, or businesses with complex file structures. Neither of these will work effectively in SharePoint. Now, I've seen businesses who have moved to SharePoint in the past and really struggle, but then they make a fatal mistake. They move their data out of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. Perhaps they go to Dropbox, or I've even seen businesses go back to using on-premise solutions like having a server or a NAS device. This is a mistake. Now, there is another solution within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem that you can use to store your company files and folders. This is called Azure Files. Now, Azure Files, as you'll find out in a minute, is cheap as chips. Plus, it's a nice alternative to SharePoint. It looks and behaves a little bit like a Mac drive if you've ever used one in the past. It's there on your computer and it doesn't rely on a synchronization like SharePoint does. Now, I think it's time to see more of this Azure Files. So I'm going to jump onto that computer behind me. First, we're going to look at pricing, and then I'm going to give you a full demo of how to set it up and what it looks like. Let's go. So just before we jump into the demo, I thought it might be a good idea to just look at the pricing of Azure Files. How much are you going to be expected to pay? Now, if you go to the Azure pricing calculator, if you just Google Azure pricing calculator, this little page should come up. And it can be quite difficult to navigate at times. What we're wanting here is to go down to storage, and in storage you'll see it says Azure Files. You can also just type in Azure Files at the top and it will appear. I simply click on that and it will add Azure Files down the bottom here, so I can start to play with it. Now, the first thing I usually do is, this is in US dollars and we're in the UK, so the first thing I do is just go to the bottom here and I change the currency to my own local currency, but you can change that to what you need it to be, okay? Okay, let me scroll back up to the top. So I'm in the UK. The first thing we want to do is change the region. So again, this is the United States at the moment. I'm going to change that to UK South. That's my local region. And then we need to choose what tier we want. And these are the hard drives that are going to be used for our Azure Files. Now, we've got two choices. We've got SSD, which is premium, and we've got HDD, which is standard. Now, for things like application hosting, for web hosting, we would always choose SSD because they are better performance. But if you're just using Azure Files to store some files and folders, company shares, things like that, the HDD standards are absolutely fine. So click on there and some more options appear. We've then got three options under type. We've got transaction optimized, we've got hot, and we've got cool. Now, I use hot or cool for file shares. When it comes to active file shares that you're probably using on a daily basis, you probably want to choose hot. If you've got lots of data that you just want to put into Azure Files in terms of kind of an archive solution, where you're archiving lots of files and folders and not using it all the time, then you can go ahead and choose cool. There's actually not a lot of difference between the two, but for this example, I will choose hot. We've then got a tab called redundancy, and we've got 4 options here. So LRS, that means local redundant storage. That means your data will be replicated 3 times within the same data center, the same physical location. We've then got ZRS, which means that your data, it will stay in the same region. So when I talk about UK South here, that is a region. And that region will consist of multiple Microsoft data centers. It's not a single data center. So going back to this, ZRS, your data will be replicated 3 times across 3 different data centers. So you'll have your data in one data center, in another, and in a third. This helps protect you if one of the data centers has an issue, whereas LRS, if one of the data centers has an issue, then you will lose access to your data until that issue is resolved. We've then got GRS, which is geo-redundant storage. So what does this do? Well, GRS is LRS, so your data will be replicated 3 times in the same data center, but it will also go to another data center in a completely different region. So if we have a big problem with the UK South region and multiple data centers are out of action, you'd be okay with GRS. And then finally, we have the GZRS, which is Geo Zone Redundant Storage, which is ZRS. So you will have your data replicated 3 times in one region, and it will also be replicated 3 times in another region. So that is the most expensive. Again, for my purpose, I'm going to use LRS. Now, this has nothing to do with backup. We're going to talk about backup in a moment. It's got to do with the availability of the Microsoft data centers. Okay, now let's go down to storage. Now, this is 1000 gigs, so that's a terabyte. What I'm going to use in this example is 250 gig. Then we're going to look at snapshot usage capacity. This is the backup side of things. I'm going to leave that at 1 terabyte, okay? And then we're going to scroll down. We're going to leave this as pay-as-you-go. And then if we scroll right down here, you can see that we've got a monthly cost. So for 250 gig, along with backup, it's about £47 a month, which isn't bad. Now, I can go back up here. As I said earlier, I can change this to cool. So what difference is that? You can see not a lot of difference there, about £1. So using hot is okay for this. When we start talking about using different redundancy methods, I'll put this to the top one, and you can see that this has jumped up quite a lot. And again, if we want to use premium drives with local redundancy, you can see that it's quite a lot there. So that gives you an idea of pricing. But when it comes to just file shares, use your hot, you choose your redundancy. We're going to talk about backup in the demo. So now we've looked at pricing, let's jump over and let me do a demo on how to set it up and how to add it to a computer. Okay, so you're going to need a global admin account. I'm logged into portal.office.com. I've got access to admin. But what I'm going to do now is go to portal.azure.com. Okay, this will take me into the Microsoft Azure portal. So the very first thing I'm going to do is create something called a resource group. Now in Azure, a resource group, think of it like a bucket. So I'm now creating Azure Files, and I want all the things, all the Azure services that are linked to that Azure Files to be in the same bucket, and that bucket is a resource group. So I'll click on there. I've got a resource group at the moment, look, for Microsoft 365 backup, but I'm going to create a new one for this purpose. So you will need an Azure subscription. So if you haven't got that in place already, you will need one. I'm going to call this resource group Azure Files RG for resource group. So it just makes sense to me. The region, so again, I want to just choose what region I want. It's the UK South. Click on next here. I don't need any tags. Review and create. Validation has passed. Let's create that resource group. That is now in place. Okay, let's go back to the home page. The next thing I want is storage accounts. So I'll click on there. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create a storage account, and it'll take me to this page here. The first thing it's going to ask for is your subscription. So you do need to have an Azure subscription in place to continue. If you've not got one of those, you need one. And it wants to know what bucket that I want to put this storage account in. Well, it's the one that I've just created, and that is highlighted there. And then it wants a name for our storage account. So why don't I call this Team Shares, okay? Then it's going to ask us to confirm the region. UK South is fine. And then there's a couple of questions about what we covered in the pricing calculator. Do we want standard drives or do we want premium drives? Okay, so these are general purpose drives. Happy with that. The redundancy by default is set at GRS, but I'm going to choose the LRS, which is a bit cheaper. I'm going to click on next. Then we've got some security configuration. If you want to look through those and improve the security side of it, that's a little bit advanced for today. I'll click on next. We've got some network connectivity. So do you want this storage account to be enabled from public access from all networks? Or what you can do is tie it down to specific virtual networks and IP addresses, or disable access altogether. So that might be for if you're using this storage account for archiving, for example, okay? Once I'm happy with that, I'll click on next. Now we've got some options in data protection. Now the soft delete feature is very useful. So if you delete blobs, containers or file shares, the soft delete means it will stay in kind of a deleted container for a period of time. So then your users can come and restore their files. So it's really useful. However, it does cost money. So we can choose anything in this section between 1 day and 365. But if you've got a lot of data in soft delete, it will affect your bill. Reading the Microsoft documentation, it does say that they recommend setting this at 7 days initially to see how it's going to affect your invoicing, and then you can play around with it, okay? So once again, we've got some more options here about versioning for blobs, etc. But for this demo, we'll just click on next. Again, we will leave this as it is and we'll click on next. We don't want tags. It'll validate and then it'll ask us to create, and that's going to now deploy. Okay, once that's done, it's deployment complete. We can go to that resource here and the storage account has been created. Okay, and then I need to go down to data storage and file shares. And now I'm going to create a file share. Let's call this marketing. Pretend it's for the marketing department. Let me spell it right to start with. Okay. Again, it's going to ask us now the tier. So we discussed this in the pricing. I'm going to choose hot for this. And it says here that I've got a maximum capacity of 5 terabytes. I don't choose how much storage I want. I've just got a maximum and I will be billed based on how much is used. Okay. Click next. And now we're talking about backup, which is really important for your data. So we're going to enable backup. This is going to create now a new vault. It's going to put it in the Azure Files bucket. And we've got a backup policy. Okay. So at the moment, we've got a daily backup at 7:30. And we're going to retain backups for 30 days. Now, if I click on Edit Policy here, you can see that I've got some different things that I can do. I can change the time zone, the frequency of backup. I can back up hourly if I want, and different times. Then I can retain weekly backups. I can retain monthly backups. I've got a lot of options. But be wary, all these backup options, the additional options, do cost more money. Okay? So I'll just click on OK. I'll click on next. It's just going to ask me to review and create that, and I will click on create. Okay, now my file share is created. We want to connect to it from our computers, don't we? So what we can do is we can click on connect. Now you've got some OSs over here. You've got Windows, Linux, and Mac. I'm going to stick to Windows. And then we want to choose a drive letter that we want this to be mapped to. So you can choose whatever you want, whichever fits with you. Maybe because this is marketing, we'll choose the M drive. And then we've got a tab here to show script, and that's going to generate us a PowerShell script. So what I will do here is I will copy that. Let me jump over to a PC now that I've got. It's just a test computer, logging on to LA Executive. So we'll log on to that. Okay, once it's logged on, if we look at File Explorer, go into this PC, we can see that there's no map drives here. There's just the C drive and the DVD drive. So what I'm going to do now is go down to search, and I'm going to type in here PowerShell. You can see it says Windows PowerShell there. So let's open this. Okay, let's copy that script into here, paste anyway for that. And that script will run. Okay, that has now run. So if I just minimize this, go back to File Explorer, you can see that I've now got a marketing team share, and that is mapped. It's empty at the moment, there's no data in it, but this acts much more like a map drive on a server. So that's Azure Files. So I hope this video has been informative. Azure Files is a really good alternative if OneDrive and SharePoint just doesn't work for your business. Look forward to seeing you again soon.